How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the Zooch and Wild Big Ten preview of 2024. Man, Zooch, we had a great SEC preview last week, and I'm just fired up for the Big Ten preview. I don't know who you can see. The guy people who are watching on YouTube can see. I'm wearing my alpha male jersey right now. Nick Bosa. It's the closest thing to the, and yes, I am making a joke of, if you guys know the account Nick Adams, yes, the true alpha male, Bosa. But it's closest to Big Ten gear as I got. But doing a deep dive in this conference, it is deep, but I don't know if it's good.
Not. And that's three good games.
Well, that's what we're gonna find out. That's one of the things I actually wanted to talk about is this kind of whirlwind before we get into each team's breakdown. I want to talk about this almost like whirlwind of mid, I call it. And I call it the whirlwind of mid because you have the two teams everyone knows that are kind of on top of this conference and have been for probably 14 years, and that's Ohio State mainly, and in the last couple of years, Michigan, I would say. Those are the two teams that have kind of run this conference. Now, when you introduce new teams who have come from the Pac-12, Washington, Oregon, it can spice things up. But those two teams are still on the upper echelon this year, you would say.
I would put those two and then Oregon as the one I would, if I had a ton of money to bet, I would bet on one of those three pretty easily winning the Big Ten.
Yeah, so yeah, we will get into our Big Ten championship breakdown after all of the teams. But it is going to be interesting to see, especially with how the new playoff format is. You know, we talked with the SEC. I think the expanded playoff does really benefit these two kind of mega conferences. And one of them is being the Big Ten. You know, you have teams, Oregon's, Penn State's. Shoot, I was looking, even a team like Nebraska or Washington or like Michigan State, maybe not this year because Michigan State is going to be painfully average, but like some of these teams could be like, man, we don't even have to win the conference. And also,
No,
like the SEC, the Big Ten, they got away from their division, so it is just going to be the two highest teams this year.
and I do think with that, leaning into the not winning your conference point, do you even, if you're, let's say Ohio State's a favorite, I think, so let's say they're in it, right? And let's say Oregon is 10-2. Do you even want to play in the Big Ten champ? Like, what is the benefit of you playing in the championship game besides you get you get a bye in the first week? If Oregon doesn't play in that game, like to me, there is no real significance to these.
I think it's a
championship
significance
games.
if you already have a loss, because then you don't have to sweat. Because I think if you already have a loss or two, which is what kind of there's a lot of cons to say about these mega conferences, but the one pro is some of these bigger teams, and we'll talk about it later in the schedule, and especially in the Big Ten, a lot of these schools they're kind of used to playing a little bit of a cupcake schedule. And when you throw in, maybe they're not the greatest teams in the world this year, minus Oregon, but you throw in a Washington, you throw in a USC, these aren't, and I don't want to like take shots. This isn't playing a Purdue or an Illinois, like these are maybe they're not elite programs, but they're solid and they're tough outs. And especially a place like Washington, it's a tough place to play. And for all the talk about the West Coast teams having to travel to the East Coast, the same thing's going to have to be said about the East Coast teams when they have to fly all the way out to Los Angeles to play one of those teams. So I'm really, really excited. And I think I want to get your thoughts on this, Zooch. At the heart of kind of this whirlwind of mid, which I think is going to be the theme of this episode of the Big Ten, is this almost down the board of uncertainty at quarterback. You have a couple of these teams that have their guys, but even the people who have their guys, they're transfers. They're not really returners. And the guys who are returning, maybe they had an okay year, but you definitely wouldn't call them elite.
No, there's not. The only one I would consider, like, I'm trying to think of returning guys. Drew Allard, definitely not. Like, he got
Exactly. Like, you see, like he's a returner and he was fine last year. I mean, he kept the turnovers down, but just almost little to no explosiveness, which if you want to be like, I'm sorry, the days of Chris Weinke are over. You have to be explosive and you have to be a game changer to make an impact in college football. Like, I get the turnovers down, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say Oregon is really the only one with a quarterback who I like think will be pretty good. Like not just like, oh, like Drew Aller could be pretty good, but I wouldn't like say like, oh yeah, he's gonna,
I
come
have a
out on
quarterback that
fire.
people I have a quarterback that I think is going to be the third best quarterback in the conference, and I think it's going to shock a lot of people. And we'll get to that later in the show. But let's start diving into these teams, like our last preview and like every preview we're going to be doing for all the major conferences throughout the summer. We're going to be doing it in alphabetical order, or as close to alphabetical as I can. Who knows? Doing this, the first letter of the Big Ten's I. There's no A, E, D. It was I. So we're gonna start with the Illinois fighting Illini. Brett Bialema. Um, I think this is the year after the year he had in 2022. The year he had in 2022 is looking more and more like lightning in a bottle to me. Unlike the trend I think Illinois fans wanted to see.
I think we might with the teams in the Big Ten now, and I'm pretty sure. Let me bring up Illinois schedule real quick. 'Cause I was looking at it earlier.
They have a tough schedule. I checked, and the thing about them is their defense needs to improve. It was bad last year, and you lose Jason Newton. I mean, you gain a couple of transfers, but this is the team I think this is the type of team, like I said, that's going to really be impacted by this new blood coming in because they're
So
going to have to play. Yeah, it's a tough schedule.
they go at Nebraska, which we'll talk about later, at Penn State, Purdue at home, and then Michigan, and then at Oregon. I'm just gonna throw it out there. We might get a similar scenario to a former Tennessee coach who was on his knees crying last year after blowout.
You,
Brett
you,
Bielema.
you think Brett
Oregon.
Bielema is going to pull a Butch Jones? Also, great. Thank you for reminding me of that. But you think that what game do you think it would hypothetically come in? Now, you want to be clear, people who have been listening, we are a pro Brett Bielema podcast. We love Brett, but yeah, when you say that stretch of teams, do you think it happens in the Oregon game when like
Well,
Dylan
it
Gabriel
could,
has like his Heisman moment and it's like 4 touchdowns with like 5 minutes left in the second quarter, maybe?
it could be that, but they also play Central Michigan this year. So we have a Brett Bielema, Jim McElwain face off, and I could just see that being like Central Michigan like winning that game 17-16, and
Yeah.
I don't know. Illinois is they're just kind of there. Like I know, like they've had what one good season, and legitimately since I started watching football, they went
Hmm.
to the Rose
Yeah.
Bowl one time and got murdered by USC. So
Yeah, I think this is just going to be an okay year. Their win total on the year for over under. Now I got these over unders they're all at the end of May. So by the time of this recording, it could be subject to change, but it's 5.5. And I think it's going to be tough for them to get to that 6 win mark. Anything's possible because there's a lot of teams in their same boat, but Luke Altmaier needs to improve. O-line needs to improve. There's just too much improvement. And this is the year where you just can't. I feel like every team has a fighting chance for that like middle spots. But let's move on to Indiana. And Indiana, the Kurt Cignetti, is that how you pronounce his name? The Kurt
I think
Cignetti
so.
era has begun. Kurt Cignetti was the old coach at James Madison, went 52-9 at James Madison. But he is going to have his work cut out for him. But I think he is the right guy for the job. But Zooch, I pulled up this stat, and I'm not a stats guy, but I looked at this weird, I think it was some conglomerate stat or a combined stat that takes in a lot of stuff, the SP plus rankings, and they are in the bottom half of all three phases Indiana was last year.
Yeah,
Yeah, take it.
they're just and that's what we're gonna get into. Like we were talking about with the mid, it was like partially joking, but just not like I don't know. I feel like like they're so far behind in resources compared to Ohio State and Michigan, but they're also not in like a fertile recruiting recruiting ground. Like a lot of teams are
Mhm.
behind in resources to Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Auburn, whoever we want to throw in there. But there's guys in that region who those teams might miss on, and they can pick them up, and they
Kind
might.
of like a
I'm not saying
UCF was for a while. Like you're in Central
right.
Florida, even if you're choosing fourth, you're still getting Florida guys.
Yeah, and like those guys just it's just there's difference. Like, Indiana is a basketball state. It just is. Not that
Mm,
they're great at basketball right now, but
yeah.
Indiana's a basketball state. I would even venture to say Illinois with Chicago is a basketball state, maybe even maybe baseball too, but it's not a hotbed for recruiting. So I think that's why
This
some
means
of
that.
these teams struggle. And
Yeah.
Indiana's, I mean, Tom Allen, what was his name? He had that one good year in 2020, the COVID year, but since then they've been just bad,
Yeah, it's
bad,
gonna
bad,
be
bad.
tough. And they got Curtis Rourke from Ohio. And I do see a path. Their schedule is pretty easy. I see a path for bowl eligibility for them, but it is small. Like they're gonna have to beat they're pretty much gonna have to win every non-con game they have. They're gonna have to pretty much win every winnable home game they have to get to even 6 or 7 wins. But let's move on to the first, I would say, interesting team. Sorry, Indiana and Illinois fans. If this was Big Ten basketball preview, you would be an interesting team. But in terms of this is the sicko team. This is the team America loves to watch like a car crash. The Iowa Hawkeyes. Kirk Ferentz is back, but can we just take a couple seconds of silence, Zooch? For the first time in a while, Brian Ferentz will not be with us. Okay, now that silence is over, Tim Lester is back, who I just found out could be just as bad as Brian Ferentz. The new offensive coordinator. They hired him in-house. I think he was like the QB coach. And and he was the coach after PJ Fleck at Western Michigan and then was fired from Western Michigan. So we'll see. My thoughts on
Speaking of
Iowa,
court,
yes, yeah, we'll get to him. But my thing about Iowa is that I think it's going to be the same story with Iowa. Their defense is loaded. Their defense is always loaded. They always know how to play the two phases. They got a tough schedule. They do have a tough schedule. I think they got lucky going to UCLA on a Friday because I think that Rose Bowl crowd with LA traffic is going to be dog ass. But I think it's going to be the same story. And McNamara, look, anything's better than Spencer Petras. So if they can just get something better than Spencer Petras, they will be fine. They'll win 8 or maybe more games, though they might get an upset. I think, like I said, that's all you can ask for if you're Iowa. Just be better than Spencer Petras was.
just score. Literally score like 20 points, and you'll probably have 10 or like legitimately 10 or 11 wins. That's all they have to do.
It's crazy. It's crazy for how. And look, maybe Tim Lester. That's what I mean. Anything could be better than what they had. This is the biggest low risk, high reward ever. I think, if like for a job like Tim Lester and Caden McNamara coming back from is Caden McNamara coming back? I don't want to sound like an idiot.
I
If
believe he is. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and he was a little banged up last year. So if you're an Iowa fan, I think that's what you have to rest your hat on. Is just new OC. The bad man is gone. Bad man is gone. Brian Ferentz. I will say, as an outsider, sad he's gone.
They legitimately, if they like this is the games they lost. They got out. I didn't even realize this. They did not score a point 3 times
It
in the
was
season.
ridiculous. It was crazy.
And they didn't score. They scored 20 or less. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 20 or less 10 times. And one of those was a 22. So 22 points or less 11 times. And they won 10 games. That's what I'm saying. Like,
They like Brian Ferentz is a good coach, and when you talk about those schools that maybe don't come from like the hottest recruiting beds, Iowa, they have Iowa can produce guys in the like the box positions, linebackers and linemen, but for teams that, and I'll give it to Iowa for a state that you wouldn't think is loaded with athleticism. They produce two of the most athletic positions on the field, I think, in tight ends and DBs that just seem to churn out of that school. So it's like you said, just score points. Just score 3 touchdowns a game. Like it is. I would say it's not hard, but it's Iowa. So, but I think Iowa's going to be fine this year. Unlike some other teams, I think they're going to be fine.
I if that offense is 2 touchdowns better a game, even 10 points better a game, they will be a borderline playoff team, I think. I truly believe they could be a borderline playoff.
I can see that. I don't hate that take. I don't hate that take. I don't know if I'm buying in, but I don't hate it. And I
Well,
think
and
that's
they
all Iowa
avoid
fans want to ask.
they have at Ohio State, but other than that, like Illinois State, Iowa State, Troy, Minnesota.
I know they're non-cons easy.
Yeah, and then they get Washington at Michigan. After they play Ohio State, they play Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, Nebraska.
Those are all pretty much 50-50 games. Those are all 50. That's crazy. All right. Well, we're going to move on to one of the teams that you said, and that is the Maryland Terrapins. What will life be like without Talia Tagovailoa? And it stinks because I mean, he's one of the best QBs Maryland's ever had. And, I looked at the schedule. Maryland, I think for the first time, no one, or they're one of the teams that benefited most from this kind of scheduling change that the Big Ten went to this year. They're going to avoid Michigan and Ohio State, which I think's why their win total is higher than Indiana for the betting line. They're at a 6.5 when Indiana and Illinois is at a 5.5. When talent-wise, I don't see a lot of the difference between Maryland and Indiana and Illinois. But they have an easier schedule. They have an easier schedule, and I think that's just the way it got shooken out.
Yeah, I mean they're another one that I feel like has been that borderline, like, oh, they have promise, but now they've lost their quarterback. So are they just going to be stuck in this 8, maybe you get 9-win phase, or are they going to actually take the next step? I don't.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, they have their coach has been there a while. I can't believe I didn't
Mike
write down
Locksley, yeah, he's been there.
Mike Locksley, and he's solid. But as we're gonna talk about, like, kind of a couple other coaches later in this show, in this world of college football, patience is at a premium nowadays. And maybe a school like Maryland, they're fine with the Mike Locksley if you can win 8 games-ish every year. So, but yeah, I think Maryland's middle of the pack. They'll make a crummy bowl, straight bowl. Yeah. They'll be on a Fox big noon kickoff where, like, your buddies will be texting you like, holy shit, they're only down 2 to Michigan right now. Or not Michigan, like, well, shit, they're only down 2 to Oregon right now, or something stupid like that. So just wait for that.
It'll be that perfect, like, watching into that game before, like, a really, really good
Yes.
like the really good, like, afternoon game kicks off.
Yes. No, that is the definition of Michigan. It's just some, like, gloomy, like, Maryland day. But yeah, we're gonna move on to the next team, which is the defending national champions, the Michigan Wolverines. I was wrong about Michigan all last year, and I would say the talent definitely took a hit. I think the biggest thing for me isn't the quarterback. I think Alex Orji is going to be fine. I think replacing that offensive line that had 6 guys signed to NFL teams, it's going to be the biggest. Now, I mean, you still got Donovan Edwards, who, to much people's anger, was on the cover of EA college football. I think it's fine. You have to include someone from the national championship, so don't freak out. But I think it's a season of questions and definitely passing technology. And I think, I wrote some stuff down. Will Alex Orji be Jalen Milroe, or will he be KJ Jefferson? Sherrone Moore, first-year head coach. Is he going to be a Dennis Erickson post Jimmy Johnson, or will he be Ryan Day? I had to slip that in there for Michigan fans. If you're listening, there we go. I know you like that, but Michigan, this is going to be a great.
He coached great after Jim Harbaugh died. No, don't forget.
Yes, he did coach great after Jim Harbaugh died. Yes. R.I.P. Jim Harbaugh. Those. I shed a tear with you, Coach Moore. But Michigan too. They got a test this year, and I think their win total shows that their win total set at 9. You're playing USC, you're playing Oregon, you're playing Texas, you're playing Washington. You're getting the full old Pac-12 experience, which on one hand you could say, man, that's a tougher schedule than we're used to, as well as the Texas preseason game. But you're getting all these old Pac-12, and yeah, you could say, oh man, maybe we aren't getting the cupcakes like we used to play. But you could also say and put a lot of those doubters to rest, being like, oh, you say like Michigan never plays anyone. We didn't do anything. Well, you're going to play Oregon and Washington this year, and Texas. This is the year to prove people wrong if you're Michigan. Again.
Yeah, I mean, they could. They're not going to be. Oh, Florida scored 4-3.
There we go.
Sorry if you keep seeing my head turn around because I'm keeping up with the Stanley Cup final. I really don't think Michigan, like, I guess it's how, like, yeah, anyone's going to take, for the most part, a big step back from winning the national title, but I still think Michigan's going to be competitive for the playoff. I didn't necessarily see anything any other Big Ten school did. Like, we'll get to Ohio State, and they made a couple moves, but Michigan isn't really going to, like, I feel like they're kind of like Georgia, and they have a perfect program to where guys just slide in right now. It doesn't matter, like, who it is. These guys will slide in. Line will be an issue because that is replacing a ton of linemen. That we'll see how that turns out, but I don't think they didn't need a ton of skill players. They ran the ball like 75 times in a row against
I know, it's
Penn
crazy.
State. So what?
And
like,
they're getting their quarterback. I mean, maybe his throwing is unknown, but we all saw Alex Orji in those wild like special packages last year. Like they could like just not throw the ball. They may do like wing tee. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if they lined up in wishbone like 10 times this year.
No, and they might. Like that's kind of what the Big Ten is. Like Ohio State plays a little bit differently than everybody else, but we'll get to them. We'll get to them. My point being, I think Michigan will be a playoff contender.
That's fair. We're going to get to the other team in the great state of Michigan. The Michigan State Spartans, Jonathan Smith era starting, coming over from Oregon State. Zooch and I know him very well, being based on the West Coast. We got to watch a lot of Oregon State during his tenure, and I was skeptical of Jonathan Smith at first, but he is a good coach. I think he's the perfect coach for Michigan State because he's going to the secondary school again, just like he was at Oregon State. He knows how to build a program where he's not going to have the most attention and resources. Personally, I thought their over-under win total that I saw was very disrespectful with them at 5 wins. I think Michigan State's going to smash that over by 1 or 2 easily. I think they easily get to 6 or 7 wins this year with Jonathan Smith, unless Aiden Childs is just like Dante Moore 2.0, and he's just not the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think a lot of their problems where there is so much, like, oh, what was that coach's name that signed the big contract and then had like the sex scandal?
Mel Tucker.
No,
Mel Tucker.
I was called him Mel Brooks. It's not Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks is a writer,
a comedian.
Yeah. Mel Tucker. That's like a lot of drama to deal with, like all of that stuff. So regardless of what people say, your head's not into it. Like, and I think that was pretty obvious because they were just getting like boat raced by teams. Not saying that they would have beaten any of those teams, but new coach, he's probably going to be there for a while. Like they're the only, like Michigan State's not the tip of the iceberg, but there's not really many places you can go from there. Especially like he would have to win first. I'm not saying they're going to go 10-2, but Jonathan Smith kind of took Oregon State was bad. Like
they were really bad. Like really one win a year bad. Like had to beat barely beat Portland State.
And got them to like top 25 finishes, which I don't know how much people know about Oregon State, but Oregon State is they're not even in the same ballpark in terms of the stuff they get as, say, Oregon, USC. Like they are, them and Washington
or even Michigan State. Even Michigan State, Jonathan Smith is going to get, I think, 3 to 4 times the amount of resources he had at Oregon State.
Yeah, they're a bottom tier power. I guess you can even consider them Power 5 school, but they're the
Cheap
very
shot,
bottom
mean.
now.
Come on, Oregon State fans. Do not tell an Oregon State fan that they're in the Mountain West. They will get upset. And I have learned the hard way.
You're kind of in
That's
the
what I
Mountain
say.
West.
Well, you are in the Mountain West. Get ready to learn Mountain West, buddy. Last thing I thought about Michigan State is that they have a hell block in the middle of their schedule. I don't know if you have their schedule pulled up, but it's like they got to play like every like power hitter in the Big Ten, like all in like a month. But I think if they can just get through that hell block, as I call it, they'll be fine.
Yeah, I think Michigan State will make a bowl game, and I think they'll be a hard out for quite a few teams.
That's fair. Well, now we're going to move on to a team that I don't know is going to be a bowl team or not. That's the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Man, has PJ Fleck gotten stale?
Yes, he was stale to me from the moment he started. I never even liked that he wears like a quarter zip with a tie under it. That like always kind of annoyed me to begin with. Like he's my he to me is what Elijah Drinkwitz is to you.
I think Elijah Drinkowitz is a good coach. He grew on me though. Elijah Drinkowitz turned face like Bryson DeChambeau. You know, we just had the U.S. Open. Elijah Drinkowitz, he is PJ Fleck. And now look, he's got the great sound bites you can put in the Friday Beers videos, you know, the Do Not Afraid to Be a Legend. But he's gotten worse since he's got there, and he's not getting help from the schedule this year. He's got questions all across the board, including at quarterback. Minnesota, like I said, one of those schools that really gonna, I think, be in for a shock this year when they don't have to play as many cupcakes, and you get a school like USC. And I think it was like the meme or the joke where it's like Big Ten schools. It's like, oh, let's see UC Washington have to play in November up in Minneapolis. It's like, yeah, I'm sure Washington, who just played for a national championship, is shivering in its boots over the Golden Gophers.
Midwesterners also, no offense to you Midwesterners, they think they're the only place on planet Earth that gets cold. It gets freezing in Washington. It gets cold in Oregon. Like it gets cold. I mean, like cold is just cold. Like maybe it's more of a damp cold, whatever they want to call it, in the Midwest. But yeah, it gets freaking cold in November. It's cold for 4 weeks. So it's not cold in October. It's beautiful in October in the Midwest and Northeast. It is cold in November. And then guess what? You guys don't like playing in that either because the Big Ten Championship is in the Lucas Oil Stadium. So you probably have at least one home game in November, probably two. You're going to play like one game. It's going to be freezing cold. It's not that big of a deal as people want to try to make it out to be. It's like, yeah, it gets hot in the South. It's hot for the first month. Maybe it's still warm on certain days in October, but it's not July weather. It's not August weather, so.
No, I totally understand that. But yeah, I don't see a lot happening with Minnesota this year, man. I really don't. Honestly, I feel bad because I think I'm going to move on. And look, if they prove me wrong, they prove me wrong. But I don't see them hitting that 5-win mark. And if they do, barely maybe. But let's move on to another intriguing team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Now, I'm a big Matt Rule fan, and I don't want to overreact, but the entire season rides on the first 2 weeks. The entire season, more specifically, rides on that Colorado game. That Colorado game is going to dictate how the year goes for the Cornhuskers.
It's going to dictate how the year goes, I think, maybe for both of those schools, but it is going to be must-watch. That game is going to be must-watch television. Nebraska.
It's going to be. It's in Nebraska this year, right? It's in Nebraska.
It's in Nebraska.
And they're going to have Dylan Raiola, the highly touted freshman recruit, flipped from Georgia to Nebraska. He's going to be playing. They have a very favorable schedule this year in Nebraska. But yeah, I literally think like that Colorado game can make or break the year because when you look at the schedule, they could be 5-0. If they beat Colorado, they could start 5-0, and now you're rolling. Now you are rolling if you're Nebraska in Big Red Nation, and they're doing their. I'm sorry to say it's stupid, but they're doing their stupid walk-up song to the Michael Jordan theme song, the clapping, the no 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 no. Like, look, it's cool, but like that's the Bulls song. You guys got to get your own song. And Oh man, I just thought you know what I just thought of, man? I think if Nebraska's good, how many times are we gonna see? And I'm gonna like it, although I think the mean people on Twitter are gonna have a field day with this. If Nebraska's bad too, is the guy who like scored the touchdown for us Make-A-Wish in Memorial Stadium.
Oh, that one. I forgot about that, but yep, it's gonna
So
be on the
we
timeline.
actually need Nebraska to be good so that the mean folks at other schools don't use that. Because we talked about SEC
Against them.
Twitter. I see you Big Ten Twitter. You got Big Ten Twitter can be just as ruthless. I see you Buckeye Fett, you freak.
They were relentless too. The Purdue, or Purdue, right? When they waved from the hospital.
Yeah, Iowa.
I there it's like there were some tweets last year, let's just say that, about with waving and offense being mentioned, and maybe people saying Brian Ferentz needed to be put there. And
Look, these are not our words. We are just reporters of these. We just speak what we see. But I think Nebraska is going to actually be fine. I have them making a bowl game this year. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. I do. That's one of my things. I think Nebraska's going to make a bowl game. I really, really do. All right. Well, let's move on.
That would be big for them.
Yeah, that would. But let's move on to Northwestern, who honestly who kind of surprised us all last year making a bowl. I thought David Braun did a solid job after the Shrek hazing incident of Pat Fitzgerald, which
That came out of nowhere.
forgot about. Which I kind of completely forgot about before looking back into getting some stuff on Northwestern. But Northwestern, I think they're going to be fine. But their offense is going to be sluggish this year, in my opinion. I have them slated as potentially being the worst offense in the Big 12. Big 12, the Big 10. But I think their defense may keep them in games. But it's just, again, it's a tough year. You got Mike Wright, who is a transfer from the SEC, and just like anything's better than Spencer Petras, anything is going to be better than Helinski if you're a Northwestern fan.
Yeah, they're just another one of those Big Ten schools that I'm just like, it's going to be rough for them now that there's no divisions. I just don't see those teams making a Big Ten championship yet.
Yeah.
I just don't see it happening, if I'm being honest. I don't like.
The biggest storyline for Northwestern this year is that they're playing like on a practice field with like temporary stands on the shores of a lake.
Well, no hazing can occur. They will get hazed on the field by their Big Ten opponent, but maybe not in their own locker.
That's funny. Well, let's head over to one of the other big boys in the conference, and what a lot of people say is the favorite to win it this year, the Ohio State Buckeyes. And I have it as a make or break year in the sense that Ryan Day has to make the playoff. He has to
win a playoff. The biggest thing he did last year, people can say like, oh, blah, 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 they just lost to Michigan. No, the biggest story with him last year was yelling at 9,500-year-old Lou Holtz.
Yes.
That was the biggest thing. Tell Lou Holtz to say something. What did he say? He had to think bugging out about Lou Holtz. But
come on, it's a soft team. It's like, we're not soft, we're from Ohio.
He's a dork too. I'm not the biggest Ryan Day fan. I think
I'm not the biggest one either, but you look at this talent roster. They got Will Howe. They might have the best transfer portal offseason in the country. You got Will Howard. They have Quinshon Judas Judkins. They have Caleb Downs. They're returning Amike Ebuka. He's not a transfer portal, but he's returning. And to top it all off, they got Chip Kelly calling plays now. So whatever you want to say about kind of like the stagnant-ish offense last year, and I think they got a guy in oh my gosh, that D end. It's not is it Jack Sawyer? Who's returning? Yes. Who's in all of the preseason like Big Ten Defensive Player of the Years? They got an easier preseason schedule than I think Oregon and Michigan. And when you look at that Oregon game, I think it's early in the season for them. That's going to be an impactful game. I think if they can get through Oregon, it almost solidifies them making the playoff.
Well, okay, so if say they don't beat Oregon, right? So like let's say they don't beat Oregon, then they get to that Michigan game and they lose. Is Ryan Day the
Then they're
coach this
sweating.
year?
Then they're sweating. I would say he's the coach, and this is how college football works with this chance. He's the coach if they're led into the playoff, because then he might play well or win a game. Then it's like all is forgiven. They don't make the playoff, and let's say maybe there's a team that's real good in the Big 12, and the Big 12 gets like 2 or 3 teams in or something crazy like that. Then I think Ryan Day might be out. I really do.
Might be looking
I
for a
really
new
do.
gig. Yeah.
Or at least like hot seat. Because I don't think he's even on the hot seat yet. But those donors are with the new format in the Big Ten where you don't even he could lose to Michigan and make the Big Ten championship, and the new format in the country to just make the playoff. He is under the most pressure in the Big Ten, in my opinion, as a coach.
By
I think there's a team. I think there's a team and program that's under more pressure that we'll get to, but this is the coach that's under the most pressure. All right, let's move on to the Oregon Ducks. I think, like Michigan, their talent's going to be put to the test, man. These guys got a tough schedule. Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and their preseason's no cakewalk either. You know, it's not the big hitters, but Boise State's solid, and Oregon State, I think, is going to be solid. It's a rivalry game for them, but Oregon may have the best offense. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about Lane Kiffin. Is Dan Lanning just a West Coast Lane Kiffin? He seems to just understand what college football is nowadays, honestly. Like, you look at the transfer classes he puts together. I mean, he's not as active on social media as Lane Kiffin, but
he knows he knows what he's doing with the Born Supremacy movies and We're Not Here for Clicks. He knows what he's doing.
No, exactly. And I mean, they got transfers out the ass. They got Evan Stewart from Texas A&M. They had the highest scoring defense in the Pac-12 last year. I'm very high on Oregon. I am, dare I say, they are in my top 3 of teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I think Oregon, we'll get to it later. We'll get to that prediction later, even though I kind of just gave it away. But Oregon's in my Big Ten championship.
I mean, the only thing I would say about Oregon, and it's kind of similarly to all of the Pac-12 schools, I think, that are moving over to the Big Ten, is that every away game for them, unfortunately, or fortunately for the team, is going to be the Super Bowl. Even if you're playing at Camp Randall in Wisconsin, it's going to be the Super Bowl for those Wisconsin players.
That is true.
Players and fans. All right, now let's move on to the team that I think is under the most pressure this year, and that is Penn State. I'm not the biggest Penn State fan, just full disclosure. I think no team, and I've said it constantly, no team benefited more from the expanded playoff than Penn State. Penn State was the team that always went 10-2. They'd lose to Ohio State and Michigan, and they'd miss out on any chance at a national championship. Now they could lose to both those teams and get in. You lose both those teams and get in, and it's I don't know what to say. Like, this is it. You have to win. You have to. You said Ryan Day has to win a playoff game. James Franklin has to make a playoff.
Yeah, he does. He is kind of in that treading water of like, okay, how many years at Penn State, if you want to be Ohio State and Michigan and Alabama and all these teams, win something meaningful. Like, seriously, you have like that Rose Bowl that they played USC in was like 10 years ago. This like Sam Darnold, I don't even think is in the NFL anymore.
He is Vikings, babe. Come on, Vikings up.
But yeah, like they've just been that though. His whole tenure there, and it's like when are you going to take the next step?
They return a lot of talent. They return both of their running backs. They got Julian Fleming out of the portal, and their defense is deep. And they got one of the most experienced secondaries in the country. A lot of their guys are 6-year guys in that secondary, and they picked up A.J. Harris, and I want to make sure I get his name right. Jalen Kimber from Florida, and A.J. Harris from Georgia in the portal to a deep secondary that was already a good defense. Deep secondary is already a good defense. What the fuck am I saying? Good They're adding to a good defense for their deep secondary. All right. This is what Penn State does to a man. It just gets your brain baffled how they can't make the playoffs. Drew Aller, we got to talk about you, but Drew Aller got to step up, has to be more explosive too if Penn State wants to get on. But
Yeah,
let's move on to what I think is going to be the worst team in the Big Ten this year.
Purdue. Yeah,
The
I
the
agree.
Purdue
You don't need to
Boilermakers.
spend a ton of time on them. Boil
I
up,
mean,
whatever.
boiler up, and don't feel too bad. You had a great year in basketball, so it's okay. But you lose Deion Burks, you lose Nick Scorton. You won. You regressed last year with your coach. And you have to play Notre Dame in the preseason. So one of those kind of free wins that sometimes you kind of hope for, to hit their win total for betting is 4 wins. Sometimes you kind of hope those non-columns will get you there, but Notre Dame game, I think they're a heavy, heavy underdog, and that Oregon State game, I think, is going to be tough for them too. But yeah, that's really all I got at Purdue. I'm sorry, like I think this is not the year to have this. There's just too much added talent to the conference.
Yeah, no, they're Purdue will be forgotten about on about October 7th. It's my prediction for the Purdue
Fair enough.
Boilermaker.
Let's move on to one of the best characters in college football. Maybe his team won't be the best, but Greg Schiano and the Rutgers Golden Knights. Now, have you checked out their schedule?
I have not looked at Rutgers' schedule.
They don't play Michigan or Ohio State.
Oh,
I think they have the easiest schedule in the Big Ten. You can pull it up. I think they have the easiest schedule in the Big Ten, and it is so easy
let's
that
see.
their win total's set at 6 right now. I think they may hit that 6 or 7 win mark before they even play their final game.
Oh yeah, I mean
They have an they have a it is so bad how easy their schedule is. And they get some West Coast teams who have to fly across country. So some of their tough opponents that are getting off a plane. It is going to be interesting. And Giano,
I've
he always
looked
has
at it.
those
Yeah,
guys ready to play. Always has those guys
I
ready to
mean
play.
they depending on how everything else shakes out. Yeah, like looking at that schedule, they could definitely like pull off like for them what would be an upset on one of these teams, and they could be looking like at going to the Big Ten championship or getting a playoff spot, which is funny to think about Rutgers in the playoff, but
Yeah. I
a
don't
10-2 Big Ten team, I don't know that they get left out.
they definitely won't. And the thing with Rutgers too, they beat Miami last year in the Pinstripe Bowl. Now, granted, Miami sucks, but like that's the same kind of team. That's the same team that's coming back. So it's like,
Yeah.
man, like Miami, like is Miami comparable to like Wisconsin? So like when you look at like when they play Wisconsin, it's like so that's how I was compared in my head. But I think Rutgers hits that over for their win total. I think they get the 7+ wins this year. They may make the Pinstripe Bowl again this year. So hey, quick commute for you Rutgers fans up to the Bronx for your bowl.
From
In your team.
Piscataway.
Yes. But let's move to the completely, if there is an antithesis to Piscataway, I think it would be Westwood and Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. We're going to talk about the UCLA Bruins right now. I think this is just a
UCLA.
fight, yes. But I think this is just a bad time to be fighting if you're UCLA. And it stinks because this is the worst possible year for them to move to the Big Ten. You got Chip
Yeah,
Kelly
and
leaving. You got Chip Kelly
losing your
leaving.
coach.
You lose your defensive coordinator to your crosstown rival. It just comes out that your school is dealing with a bunch of, I mean, we see they're dealing with a bunch of off non-football related problems, whether it be social or budget wise. There are billions of dollars in debt at UCLA right now in their athletics department. And they have a tough schedule. They have 2 cross-country flights. They have a flight to Hawaii they have to play week 0. They have a Nebraska flight, and they have to play Washington on the road. That's a tough schedule. And you lost some guys in the transfer portal. Now, I do think Ethan Garber's the QB showed flashes, but I think UCLA's record is going to be worse than what their team actually is. And I think Deshaun Foster just has to use this as just like a building block year for them.
Yeah, no, they got to come into it knowing they're gonna have a lot of warts, for lack of a better term, this year. But warts are removable, and I think I like him as a coach. I think UCLA could improve and end up being a really good program. but give them some time. It's not going to be an easy schedule. It's like a lot of new stuff. Hard, like you're playing the hard teams. Take the losses with a grain of salt this year, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, like clockwork, I think one of my favorite things about college football is just waiting for oh man, I just almost burped just thinking about this. But like when people tweet out like, man, I can't believe this is the Rose Bowl right now. And it's like two people there. And I also can't wait because I know there is a certain Twitter fan base that rhymes with the Iowa Buckeyes. And I know when they go travel to the Rose Bowl, they are going to outnumber the UCLA fans. And there may be some problems. Let's just say that. There may be some confrontations between Iowa fans and UCLA fans. I think it's a Friday game, like I said. So a lot of those UCLA fans are going to be coming post work, and Iowa fans will be on vacation. So let's just say there could be some problems there in Pasadena during that game.
I'm excited. I am excited.
All right, well, let's move to the team in the same city as UCLA, just down the, well, if you want to use my Californian, well, you take the 405 and then you take the 10 downtown, and then you get spit off in downtown LA by Koreatown, and you get to USC, the USC
And the man
Trojans,
who
baby.
can't cook barbecue at all, Lincoln Riley.
Barbecue or tuna. I think personally, I thought the tuna was a little. Tuna's tough to cook. Also, he just shouldn't have posted that. But I mentioned before, I think there's going to be a quarterback that's going to break out this year, just behind Dylan Gabriel. And that quarterback is going to be my boy Miller Moss. I think Miller Moss has an absolute breakout year. I'm talking
He is the
Big Ten type year.
He is what USC. We talked about it last year. He is what USC needs.
You need a white, somewhat unathletic quarterback who just looks like he surfs when he's not playing football. From Southern California. It has to be from Southern California too, and has to be preferably Orange County. Preferably Orange County. Miller Moss, I think, checks all those boxes. I think Miller Moss might not have played in Orange County. I'm not sure. He might have played in LA County, but checks a lot of those boxes off for Miller Moss. And USC, they made a lot of implementations in the offseason to try to fix the defense that was so bad under Alex Grinch. They got a new defensive coordinator hired from UCLA, DeAnton Lynn. They got SDSU, South Dakota State University's head coach, to come over to be an assistant coach. They got transfers out the butt again this year on defense. And I think I read something from Lincoln Riley. He said they want to be bigger instead of going for that more speed defense Grinch liked to play. Unfortunately for them, I think they're in the big USC would be perfectly primed for a Pac-12 like championship run if they were still in the formal Pac-12, I think, this year. Unfortunately, I think they're playing in a tougher conference. I think they might see 8 wins, 9 wins. Similarly to last year, I think they're going to be a very good team that just can't beat the upper echelon in their own conference.
I have a take about USC. It's a take about the Big Ten overall. I'm going to save it to the end of the show. I'm going to save my USC prediction for the end of the
Bookmarked. Okay, well, can you at least give us, being the Ole Miss fan you are, can you at least reprimand USC for what they did to Lane Kiffin on the tarmac?
Yeah, that one. He's grown. He needed to grow up. They did what they had to do, and it's allowed Ole Miss to get him by getting fired on the tarmac. Is like, I just imagine texting.
It's all time.
Well, fellas, I just got fired on the tarmac.
Do you think they made him fly like Delta home?
He could have. It's been a long road for Lane. It's been a long road. Got fired by Al Davis, fired by USC at the tarmac. But he's thriving right now. He is thriving. So
he is. All right. Well, let's move on to the other team, not Michigan, that played in the national championship last year, and that's the Washington Huskies, who I think if still had Kalen DeBoer, if they still had him as their coach, they would be, I think, the favorites. I honestly think if they had Kalen DeBoer still, I think Washington would go into this Big Ten year as one of the 2 favorites to make the Big Ten championship game. That's not the case. as the Jedfish era begins. But
Which
Zooch, I
is a
want to
good
give you
hire.
this little.
He's a good hire.
I think it's a good hire too, but I want to give you this little fun fact right here. Washington does not return a single offensive starter from last year.
I I
Not good.
UCLA. No, not good. And like all of the you're losing a lot. Like those guys were really talented too. That's the bigger I get losing people at any time always sucks, but they're losing like quality.
NFL level,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah. So
You know, I
whole
thought they did
game
fine.
maybe.
No, that's what I think. I don't think they're going to be bad like some people are saying, because the defense still returns quite a bit of starters, I think. They picked up guys in the transfer portal. They got Mississippi State QB Will Howard. They got I didn't know this till I looked it up. They got Cal's #1 receiver last year in Jeremiah Hunter on their team. Cal's top pass catcher from last year. And
Yeah, I mean,
they pick up, I think, an all Mountain West offensive lineman in Drew Azzopardi from San Diego State. You bring in Steve Belichick to coach up the defense. I think Washington's going to be fine. And I think Washington's going to be fine. I think they'll make some noise. I think, like you said, think Big Ten teams are going to go into Husky Stadium, American Airlines Field, a stadium that you've been in, Zooch. And I think they're going to underestimate that environment a little bit. I think it may catch at least one team off guard having to play there. I think Washington's going to be fine. They're over under win total set at 7. I think that's a fair one. I think they may get to 8.
yeah. Oh, it's just that's losing so much. I think it kind of helps losing that much and having a new coach. I think that makes it a little bit easier in a
Start
way.
fresh.
But yeah, like 7 or 8 wins, I think, is there would be a great season for them based on what
Yeah.
they lost.
All right. And now we're going to be moving on to the last team in the now 18-team Big Ten, which is weird. It's called the Big Ten. That's something my mom having to explain conferences to my mom now is just it is unreal because the Big 12's got too many and the ACC has Pacific and Texas is not this. Well, it's having to explain that to someone who doesn't watch, having to explain the college conferences this offseason to someone who watches college football. And I know some people listening, please let us know in the comments if you've had to deal with this too. And it's going to get worse. Trust me, it's going to get worse as the season starts when some casuals, I love casuals watching our sport. It makes it better. But someone's going to be like, why is Oregon playing Minnesota? They don't play. And it's going to be like, where have you been, man? But we're moving on to Wisconsin. Can Fickle take the next steps in kind of
Yes.
rebuilding the program?
I'll keep
You
my
think so?
Wisconsin one short. Wisconsin will have 9 wins, look a little bit overmatched in their big games. Besides one that'll be really close. They'll look much improved compared to last year. I know the offense was stagnant for a while last year. But yes, I think Wisconsin will look
Really?
loads better than what they did last year. I think Luke Fickle's a pretty good coach. Don't like what he wears either. The Big Ten and the coaches choose to wear just annoys me after that. That's too tight on him. But I'm gonna say Wisconsin gets to 9 wins this year.
Okay. I think me and you have similar kind of opinions on these teams, except for I think you're lower on Nebraska than I am. And I think I'm lower on Wisconsin than you are. I think they do about the same. I don't think they get to that 9-win mark. I think they're at that 7 to 8-win mark, kind of similarly. Partially because I don't trust Tyler Van Dyke at all. I really don't. I really, really don't.
Turnover machine.
I mean, although you know what? He might be one of those quarterbacks that just he's coming home. Maybe it's like when you release a dog, it's like when you have a border collie in an apartment. That was Tyler Van Dyke at Miami. Tyler Van Dyke needs some room to run in the Big Ten. Tyler Van Dyke's a Big Ten quarterback, maybe. He needs to hand the ball off a couple times. He needs to drop back, maybe a little play action. Live in Madison, Wisconsin, eat some cheese curds, not have to worry about the glitz and glam of Miami,
And I will give him the benefit of the doubt that Miami quite possibly had the most moronic ending to a game in the history of any sport. They did, They're not able to
Thank you for reminding me. Thank you for reminding me of that. Did you see in the new NCAA football game that they're like, when your team is up, it'll automatically like kneel and like wind the game clock out so you can have like the action visual of like the teams running out and shaking hands before it's over. There's hundreds of quote tweets going like, will not happen if you play as Miami. Like if you play as Miami, this animation does not happen.
Mean. But you got to pay for your sins, Miami. So
that you do, and trust me when we get into our ACC, do a little preview. Should we flip a coin to see what we do next? Big 10 or Big 12? Big 12 or ACC? We'll figure it out later.
Or both are going to be fun. Both have some funny squads rolling into those conferences.
We will. I think we're gonna.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the schedule.
If a certain quarterback for a new Big 12 team plays more than 1 year in the Big 12, I'm getting rid of the conference. There is a certain quarterback on a new team to the Big 12 who, with some new NCAA rulings, might get an extra year.
I know who you're thinking, and if that also happens, I may be spoiling it for the people who know, but let's just say we are geographically close enough to make an in-person voice heard.
We will see. Get a
I think that makes it up. Get a degree. Yeah, you need to commit. Yeah. So, I think that does it. Yeah. So we will, in the next 2 weeks, we will be doing our Big 12 preview. But before that, we got our team awards and our Big 10 championship predictions. We are done with running through all the teams. Let's get into our Big 10 championship predictions. I think you went first last week for SEC. So I'm going to go first this week. I have, as the number 1 team in the conference, the Ohio State Buckeyes playing the Oregon Ducks in Indianapolis. I think Ohio State beats Oregon in their regular season matchup. I think Oregon wins close to every other game. I think Ohio State may be undefeated. I think they finally beat Michigan this year. I think Michigan is going to be very close to Oregon. One of those situations where Michigan, although the thing with Michigan, though, I think they're going to have a hiccup before the Ohio State game, whether that's the Oregon, whether that's not. So right now I have Ohio State over Oregon. Got both those teams making the playoffs, as well as Michigan making the playoffs. That's my only 3 Big 10 teams I have making the college football playoffs.
Okay. I like it. I agree half with you. However, as Stephen A. Smith is known to say, I think the Big 10 is going to fall flat on its face. Not flat on its face. That's a little harsh. But I think the Big 10 is going to have Oregon in the Big 10 championship. I also have looked at their schedule. Their hardest games are probably going to be non-conference games. We'll see how some of these teams shake out. But I think a 2, maybe 3 loss USC team is going to play Oregon in the Big 10 championship and make the Big 10 a meme. And I have reasoning behind it. The LSU game does not matter for the Big 10 championship. The Notre Dame game does not matter for the Big 10 championship. They play Utah State too, but other than that, their Big 10 games are at Michigan, week 3. So Michigan is going to be after the Texas game. We don't know what Michigan's going to be. They get Wisconsin, Minnesota, Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, Washington, Nebraska, at UCLA.
So no Ohio State, no Oregon.
I think Ohio State and Michigan might end up with 2 losses, and I think USC could have more, like 3 losses.
Your scenario. Do you realize the implications of your scenario? The Big 10 would lose essentially all credibility. I might root for that. I might root for that just to kind of end this like kind of conference hierarchy, in my opinion. I think, man, that's big. Look, I think USC is going to be better than their win total this year. I think USC is a team that kind of plays into big games. I talk about the Pac-12 schools, or the former Pac-12 schools, being every team's Super Bowl. I just see USC getting tight in a game. getting tight in a Wisconsin game, a tight in a Rutgers game, and just kind of fumbling. But now that you bring it up, 2 of their hardest games, oh my goodness. Maybe that's the Big Ten. Iowa fans have poisoned my room for talking down on true Big Ten football. But if that's the case, oh my goodness, the implications, the implications would be so great.
And I'll go ahead and throw them out there because we're getting high on our time. Newcomer of the year, I agree with you. Miller Moss, disappointment of the year, throughout.
So I have my best offensive player of the year actually not being Miller Moss. I have Dylan Gabriel as my offensive player and my newcomer of the year. I think Miller Moss gets screwed. I think Miller Moss is a 3rd or 2nd team quarterback. And I think my defensive player of the year is the absolute tackling machine, Jay Higgins, inside linebacker at Iowa State for the single player awards. So just to run back my single player awards, offensive player of the year, Dylan Gabriel. Newcomer of the year, Dylan Gabriel. Defensive player of the year, Jay Higgins. He had 170 total tackles last year. I think he's going to do just the same this year, if not more.
Rooting for my Big Ten chaos scenario. Like I said, he can see this happening. They beat Michigan.
Too.
If they beat Michigan, it could happen.
If they beat Michigan,
it'll be hilarious.
Trust me, if they also beat Michigan, USC, there will be highlights of the Rose Bowls in the late 2000s where those teams are overmatched because it was like it's those late Pete Carroll teams that there should have been a 4-team in. They would have made it every year as like a 3 or a 4 seed, and they always had to play some
championship this year.
Yeah,
but they played an overmatched 10 team all the time.
Yeah, but those were disappointments for playing those USC teams. But my disappointment of the year is just I think it's going to be Penn State as a whole. And I know my track record of choosing Big Ten stuff is pretty poor with my Michigan predictions all last year, but I think Penn State has a fine year. I just think they're a disappointment in the fact that I think they missed the playoff. And then I think you're gonna have those conversations. It's like James Franklin, like it's just gonna be a crossroads for Penn State where it's like, Penn State, are you a program that is okay with just being real, real good? And maybe James Franklin gets you one every couple years, but you're never gonna win a natty with this guy. You're never gonna win a natty with this guy. Or are you gonna be the man, let's take a chance and improve our program, but potentially hamper our program for a decade by firing one of the best coaches that we've ever had. I can totally see that scenario if Penn State does bad.
My last thing on here tonight, how far back do you have to go? And I don't have the stats in front of me, but when was the last time a bald head coach won a national title? Just throwing it out there.
Was Jimbo balding in his time at Florida State?
He was balding, but he wasn't shaved head like Elmer Fudd hairdo. That is how I look at it.
Come on. You
Wolverine hunting.
Wolverine hunting. Gotta stop.
That's fascinating. Well, I'll look it up and find a bald head coach who won a national title. But right now, I'm going to go eat because I am starving and had car trouble today and haven't eaten since 1 p.m. So,
perfect. All right. Well, everyone, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for, even whether it was listening to a single team, whole thing. Thank you guys. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show. Make sure you're following us on Instagram.
It helps when you guys like and subscribe. I know you don't want to hear that because every podcast you listen to says it, but it is true.
But it is true, and we got some great support on the clips that we did in the SEC championship. So this is stuff that people like to hear, these kind of run-throughs. Thank you guys again for listening. Make sure you're following us on all of our stuff. And in 2 weeks, we will be having our Big 12 preview, and you will find out who that quarterback is that Zooch and I were talking about. Until then, we will see you guys later. Thanks for listening.